There's not a lot to go on for the crash of a B36TC at North Perry Airport in Pembroke Pines, Florida. So stick with us on FlyWire to see what lessons we can learn about this takeoff accident. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire, we're going to take a look at the crash of a B36TC just after takeoff in one of the most densely populated areas of the United States on 15 March 2021. The question is just what options existed for this fateful flight. I want to start by describing what we know of the crash so far. Okay, I'm going to throw red flags on problem areas as we go, and you know, a lot of aviation happens in densely populated areas, and it's a good idea to have a plan. In fact, it is a fact that piston engines fail at a larger rate than turbine engines do. Okay, per flight operation, the odds are in your favor, but piston engines overall are safe, but it is incumbent on the pilot to evaluate and mitigate risks as much as possible, and they are higher in piston engine airplanes. I fly pistons, and I'm aware of that, and I try to plan for that. This particular airplane was a B36TC Bonanza, and it apparently had been advertised for sale, maybe for a while. But the B36 is a modification of the A36TC, which was basically an A36 with a 300 horsepower turbocharged Continental TSIO 520 UB engine. For the B36, Beech changed the instrument panel and the controls, but mostly the flight controls and the throttle, etc. But most importantly, they added a bearing wing with a larger wingspan and increased fuel storage. And the B36 was also certified to a higher gross weight. And I think about 116 or so of these airplanes were built. This airplane, November 236 Bravo Charlie, was reported to have 360 hours total time, which is not a lot for a 1996 airplane. For the first 15 years of its life, it flew an average of 20 hours a year. From my perspective, age and usage here is a red flag, particularly in a salt air environment. I don't know how long it was in Florida. This turbocharged engine operates at a max of 36 inches of manifold pressure, and historically has issues with cylinders not making TBO for a variety of reasons. The time between overhaul, or TBO, for this engine is 1,600 hours or 12 years. In the GA world, most operators fly an average of 50 hours a year and don't overhaul an engine at 12 years. That number, the 12-year number, strictly applies to Part 135 commercial operators. TBO typically isn't a trigger for an overhaul as much as the on-condition situation. Overhauls are generally dictated by the condition of the bottom end, the crankshaft, the crankcase, the camshaft, and of course the power produced by the engine. And a lot of that is the cylinders. Essentially, this becomes a subjective decision about timing. The engine was reported to have had a top overhaul, which means all the cylinders and pistons were replaced at 311 hours, 49 hours previous to this accident, but that was 10 years before the accident. That means for the last 10 years, the airplane had averaged less than 5 hours a year. And for me, that is definitely a red flag. Whether an airplane sits or it flies, all the systems tend to age out. Instruments sitting on delicate bearing surfaces tend to corrode. They tend to have flat spots. Tires become brittle. They develop flat spots. Rust attacks the steel components of the engine, especially in areas you cannot readily see, even when you do a top overhaul. A 25-year-old airplane with 360 hours is not a new airplane. From my perspective, it's a basket of unknown maintenance issues, and that's an issue, for me at least. The real issue for triggering an overhaul is usage, in my view. If the airplane flies regularly, and 50 hours a year would be at the bottom end of the definition of flying regularly, and then expense is, of course, an issue. It's not cheap to overhaul an engine. But from my perspective, the overriding issue is the unescapable fact that airplanes need power to fly, and powered airplanes are not good gliders. The trick is here to judge when to overhaul to prevent a failure, not to wait until a failure happens. It usually doesn't work out very well. So at this point, it looks like the accident flight was likely a warm-up flight before a demonstration, or just to keep the airplane, the oil warm or whatever. Both occupants were from the local area, and the previous flight was only 20 minutes long, 6 days prior to this particular flight. And it appears the same profile was planned for this flight. By the hours flown, we can say that the pilot was probably not proficient. I don't know if he was flying something else. And currency may have been an issue in this, and that's also a red flag, if that's actually the case. The NTSB is going to have to figure that one out. The airplane was clear for takeoff on 10 left, with a left downwind departure. Same profile as the previous flight. The crash happened on short final for 28 left, about 3 minutes later. So the airplane flew a right 180-degree flight path, more or less. There was a residential front door camera, a Ring camera, that recorded the crash sequence itself, and I'm going to play that for you here. The first noise you hear is the sound of the unfortunate bystander car driving past the house, followed by the airplane cutting through the elevated power telephone wires, and then the aircraft ground impact sequence. The airplane was nose low in a right bank of 60 to 70 degrees, and there was no engine noise. And frankly, I'm pretty sure it was fully stalled at this point. The vector of the airplane was to the left, roughly 45 degrees off the 28 left axis. And you can see that in the path the airplane takes after ground contact and where it ends up. The right wing hits the ground first, and that imparts a right rotation as the momentum carries the aircraft forward along its vector path, not where the airplane's oriented. The nose impacts the SUV on its right side, and it spins it around backwards. The SUV ends up facing the opposite direction on the other side of the road. As the aircraft starts spinning around, the right fuel tank is breached by the wing hitting the street. And the bluish mist you see here is probably avgas from the right wing. The right wing tip is broken off and it skips down the road. And then just before the aircraft leaves the Ring camera frame on the left side, you can see a spark that ignites the avgas fumes and the liquid now spread over the road. The fire rapidly advances, consuming the avgas on the road towards the original impact point. The airplane ended up against the airport fence and appears to have been completely consumed by fire. This is a tragic accident where both occupants of the airplane were killed, as well as a child traveling as a passenger in the SUV. This is a tragedy. And I think that we have to learn what we can out of this accident to honor those who lost their lives. Just what lessons can we pull from this tragedy? I don't think we have to wait for the NTSB to determine that this was an engine failure and turn-back accident. At this point, it is actually immaterial what failed on the airplane. My suspicion is that it will turn out to be age-related, but what is more important is what happened, how the pilot flew it, and how we can avoid this fiery end if our engine should quit right after takeoff, especially in a populated area. And this is a shot of Pembroke, or the Pembroke Pines area where North Perry is located. And as you can see from this satellite picture, this is a densely populated residential area. What options did this pilot have? In a previous video, I covered the impossible turn, trying to lay out some parameters for turning back to the runway if you have an engine failure, and or even to the airport, that area that you came from. Not necessarily to the runway, but the airport area being a cleared airway or cleared area. If you have not practiced this maneuver, I wholeheartedly recommend you just land straight ahead. It's not likely that you're going to be able to manage your energy successful and stay alive if you haven't practiced this thing. This is right close to the stall, and you have to maximum perform the airplane. You're not going to do that in a stressful situation unless you have practiced it. And then if you practiced it, you set maneuvers, and you want to follow those, parameters, and you want to follow those parameters, period. Full stop. It decides. When the engine quits close to the ground, it seems to me the situation is much more critical than it is at altitude. You have only the energy on the airplane, the speed and the altitude, and woefully little of that. You need to use what you have to survive. And I will say that the last priority is landing with the gear down. The first priority is to land on something as clear as possible, not hit anything hard. Don't get into an argument with a house. You're going to lose. Make a controlled landing, and the way to stay alive is to dissipate your energy as slow as you can, not fast, because, you know, our bodies can't really sustain fast decelerations. In this case, there were no really good options. The only option I can see is to land straight ahead on 9th Street and try to avoid cars. Probably not going to be able to completely do that. Perhaps a right turn to land on 71st Street, and then you have traffic because it's more of a throughway. Without ADS-B data, I don't really have any reliable way to discern what altitude and airspeed the airplane had when the engine failed. But it is painfully obvious that there wasn't enough energy in the airplane to make that 180-degree right turn to runway 28 left. Perhaps there was enough energy to make the grass of the airport, somewhere around Maxwell Park here in the middle. And frankly, those are really the only options available. But the pilot chose to attempt a landing on runway 28 left, focused on that and committed to it. And at some point, the pilot discerned that there wasn't enough energy to make it, and he stalled the airplane rather than switch to the grass or a road. You gotta be prepared to accept reality. Don't forget the success that Sully achieved with the forced landing on the Hudson. We just looked at that in the previous video. He landed on the water where there wasn't anything to hit. Then you only have to worry about is swimming. Here, folks, we're talking physics here. This isn't politics, this isn't feelings, this is hard reality. Wishful thinking cannot change Newton's laws. You have to conform on this one. Manage your energy for the best result, decide on the best course of action, and focus on that, then execute. I recently had an engine out situation during an overhead. That's a visual approach, and then you brake, kind of like the military style. And it was an unwanted opportunity to practice what I preach. At about 2 miles, the engine quit. I did an immediate left turn, managing my energy right at best glide all the way around until I lined up with a runway. I was looking for alternative fields to land in if I wasn't close enough to the runway when I finished my turn, because I wasn't really sure how far out I was at that point. And there weren't many at this airport. Fortunately, when we rolled out on final, we were spot on, if just a tad fast. And at that point, I was very happy to have the runway be about 10,000 feet. We made it without further drama, and only afterwards did I think of the alternative outcomes, not during. The important point about this is focusing. Your only job here is to focus on the job at hand and fly the airplane and try to do the best you can on the landing. Okay? Fly as far into the accident as possible. Bob Hoover's advice. Success in a highly stressful situation like this comes with having a plan for every major segment of your operation. Decide what happens before pushing the power up for takeoff. For the most part, you don't have a vote for when the engine quits, but you do have control over what happens after, okay? Normal flight can change in the blink of an eye, and you better have a plan A and a plan B in your hip pocket. Time-critical situations like this, you just don't have much time to make it up on the spot, okay? I would like to say something here about risk factors and flying in particular an old engine with low hours, okay? It's not a new engine, it's not a low-time engine. It has time, ages things. Time ages things. I don't think mist fueling was an issue here in this accident. That blue mist and the way the fire spread with little soot leads me to believe that this fuel was indeed avgas. Jet A has a much lower flash point than avgas and doesn't mist the same way. And it is reluctant to start burning, and then when it does, it burns very dirty when it does light off. I think in the end, the problem will be found with the engine, and more than likely, it's going to be an issue traceable to the age of the engine and surface. That's my bet on the red line. I want you to ask yourself, this is you asking yourself, what am I willing to bet my life on? And what am I willing to bet my passenger lives on? For me, that answer is really conservative. I'm very conservative on that point. So how do you tell when it's time to overhaul or replace an engine? Well, frankly, I think that's a good topic for another video, not this one. So stay tuned. I think I'm gonna do one on that. Meanwhile, I hope you liked the video. If so, hit like and subscribe. It looks a bit like this right here. And I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters right up here. I'll leave a link down below if you'd like to support the channel. I really appreciate it. It helps me make these videos. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on FlyWire. Click this link for the latest upload. Click this link for whatever YouTube thinks you ought to watch. Or you can click this link to subscribe. Thanks for watching.